Well, next, I don't think there's an introduction necessary for Tom, but I'll let him, anybody who doesn't know him, I'll let him introduce. And just so you know, I was telling Lloyd this is a custom presentation Tom has put together for us and is taking advantage of our Monday session as well. So somebody's like, oh, I've seen Tom talk before. Not this one. So take it away, Tom.
Well, thank you very much, Alex, and it's great to be here. It's interesting because Alex, when he asked me to talk, he said, Tom, we don't need a 100 level course. We need a 300 level course. And Deb was saying in our session on Monday that she would like more information on the step by step, what we actually have to do to get it done. And a lot of times when we're speaking to pets groups or we're speaking at institutes, people want to know why. They want to know the club models. They want to know the club types. But this group knows all that because you've been to training. And in our zone, we do a lot of our training at the institute. So what I did was I honored that request. And then also in the ICA, the Innovative Club Advocate breakout session on Monday night, there are some questions asked. So we answered those in a graphic kind of way, and I'll put a narrative to it. And then, of course, there'll be time for questions and answers because we want you to leave with all the answers you are seeking. And then, of course, you can reach out to us anytime, and we're happy to talk to you at all, anytime. And if you want to, you won't be interrupting. If you want to shout out a question during it, that's fine. You don't have to wait to the end because it'll be more exciting that way. So what we're focusing on is starting new clubs. And it was interesting because what Mark Maloney told us when we had our meeting the other night on Monday night, he said that is the most important way to grow Rotary. Now, we all know we have to attract members in, and we all know that we have to engage our members and retain them. But the areas of the world, and if you take the world and you divide it up, basically, the Northern Hemisphere is not doing well when it comes to membership growth. They're in decline. Now, the Southern Hemisphere, other than Australia, they're doing pretty well. So if you look at the areas of the world that are growing, Asia, Africa, you'll realize that they are also the places that we're having a lot of new clubs form. So again, we're not going to talk about the why. We could talk about that another time. We're not going to talk about club types because you all know that. What we're going to talk about is the step-by-step how you could form a club. And then we're going to talk about, in the clubs that we formed, the lessons we learned from forming those clubs, because obviously we didn't do everything right. And hopefully you can learn from that so you don't have to make the same mistakes that I made. And also a question we get asked a lot is, what are the keys to a successful new club? Not only getting a club started, but what clubs actually stay around after and the nurturing that we do for it. And then a question we're also asked a lot of times is, where are the opportunities? What's the easiest place to start a club and get something going? Especially if you have districts, and as one of your 3 or 4 districts as an ICA and as a ARC, if you haven't started a club in those districts and those districts haven't started for a while, what's an easy way to get to do it? So we thought a good one to use as an example is our Veterans Club. So I don't like using stock photos. I like using pictures of real people, and you'll see Lloyd's picture there on the right, because they have stories that go along with them. And when you're forming a club, if you can use pictures of your prospective members and give them a brochure with their picture on it, they love to pass them out. So the first step, what we need to do is we need to find a champion. And Deb mentioned earlier this evening that she says, well, how does a district actually start more than one club at a time? The key is to have a champion or a spark plug. And, we also get asked, well, what's the easiest club to start? Well, listen to your community and find out what clubs they want to start. I mean, Lyle actually started a club for a lake that they wanted to redo. So he heard that need in the community. And when you have that need, it's good to follow that need. Hey, Alex, can you interrupt me if anyone raises their hand and I don't see it? Okay, so the champion, the supporter, they have to be passionate. We like to call them spark plugs, the people who really have a cause and they really want to get behind it. Like Kay is, she started the first ever club for empowering women, and that's gone really well. And she started the first club for the for people who want to work on the environment. So you need someone who's got that passion to make it go. And a lot of our new clubs are actually cause-based clubs, meaning that the club is focused around a particular cause, a particular service that wants to be done. And what does that mean? It means that they focus their meetings, their club meetings, their experts that come and speak are usually about that issue. Like an End Human Trafficking Club, a lot of those clubs actually have professionals that make up their members. And one week they might have a surgeon talk about how they remove tattoos from the back of the neck of a victim who's been trafficked. Others might talk about a different area of focus, like some End Human Trafficking clubs focus just on ending sex trafficking. Other ones look at the whole slavery issue as a whole. But you have to have someone who knows why they're doing it. And then the other thing is find a local supporter. You know, when we were starting the Veterans Club, we found a Rotarian who was a general in our area. And so he didn't want to be a member of the club, but we made him an honorary member. And he brought a lot of credibility. If we were cold calling veterans, if we mentioned his name, it would help out. So if you can find someone in your local community that already is a supporter of that cause, it's great. So then you have to recruit the right members. It's very much like that Stanford professor. You have to have the right people on the bus, and then you have to have them in their right seats. So when we started the Veterans Club, we looked at different veterans organizations around our area, and there was Yellow Ribbon. There was a group called um, Eagle Group, which was a group that met with the Fortune 500 companies once a quarter they met, and they would find veterans jobs. So what we would do is we would go to their golf tournament and we would hand out flyers about what we're doing. We had a retired general who had a nonprofit group that he was the executive director of that supported homeless vets. He tried to find them homes. So we found a few members from each of those groups, and it really helped us grow not only the initial, but also after, because we got mailing lists. Like the Eagles group had 900 people who were members of their organization. They wouldn't give us their mailing list, but they sent out emails for us announcing that our club was starting. So if you're just partnering up with one group, then you might not get a good diversity of different individuals. We went to the veterans home and we got a surgeon who was married to a nurse, and they both joined, husband, couple, wife. So, you know, that's important. The other thing is you want to make sure, if you can, to have some diversity when you're recruiting. So we had people in their 20s all the way up to a gentleman who was a World War II vet who was 85. We had men and women. We had all our armed services except the space group, because that wasn't existing at that time. But the more diversity you have, you'll find that there's a lot of better answers to questions if you have a challenge. And they all look at things differently. So one question we were asked on Monday night by one of our ICAs, our Innovative Club Advocates, was how many people join these new clubs that are new to Rotary versus what we call retreads, where they were in a Rotary club. And we get this question asked most often at president-elect training seminars, because as a president, you know, the president's focused on growing her or his club, and they're afraid that if they start another club in their city, they'll lose members. So what we found out is 88% of members, charter members of a new club, are new to Rotary. And it's interesting because if you break that 12% down, some of those people would probably have left Rotary if they didn't have another club. You know, and we recently started about 18 months ago, a Pride Club here. There were only 2 members out of 35 charter members that were in Rotary and left their clubs and came here. But both of them were actually thinking about leaving. And when we started the first club in the world to end human trafficking, there were 3 individuals before the club started that were working a tri-district education, where they would once a quarter put on an education seminar, and they would have people Zoom in, US senators and things like that, and talk about the issue. But they were going to leave Rotary. And the reason they were is because they weren't a club. So they couldn't get global grants, they couldn't get local grants, and they tried to get speakers to speak to the clubs. But most of the clubs said, okay, you could have one speaker, but they didn't want a speaker once a year at a club. They wanted to have those speakers on a regular basis. So, you know, those members would have left Rotary. So you can dispel that myth, because this is a study that Rotary International headed by Brian King, the Rotary International Director of Membership Development, came up with. So the third step is to start meeting in small groups. So in this picture, you'll see on the left front, that's Kathy Army, because she was a nurse that worked in the Army. And then Kathy Navy is sitting right in front of me. And she was a commander, and she would point at people, and you knew you had to do what she said. So, but this is another good thing about diversity. These two women were ahead of membership. And when we started the club, we asked for volunteers because when you fill out the paperwork, there's 5 offices for a Rotary Club. It's different for a satellite club. It's different from a Rotaract club. But we asked for volunteers to be president and vice president. And the 2 people that raised their hand um, were both frontline military, both gentlemen one was from the 82nd Airborne. And they were like, we're going to grow this club to be the biggest in the district by the end of the year. And da, 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 da. Well, Kathy Army and Kathy Navy, they thought that we should get to know everyone and get to know their personality and see if they'd be a good fit for our club. And really, the diversity of both those opinions going together was the right answer. We needed to grow, but we also needed to make sure that there was a good fit. So why small groups? Why not just bring 30 people together, get some pizzas, get some subs, and start talking to people? Well, what we learned is if you bring a bunch of people together, a lot of times it fractions the groups. Some people want to meet at night. Some people want to meet at the morning. Some people don't want to meet in person. They just want to meet virtually. But what we found out is if we have smaller groups and we meet, mostly over lunch, and we bring 2 people, maybe 5 people. Both pictures you saw were lunch meetings and we were getting started. It seems that there's a coalition that builds. And then when you meet with other people, you can say, well, the group is leaning towards this. No decisions have been made, but it seems to work in smaller groups. Plus, people feel like they're heard in smaller groups, and in larger groups, they feel like they're getting lost. So step number 4 is one of the most important things you can do. And one of the lessons I learned is you have to find out what your potential charter members want. In my city, we already had 3 clubs and 1 Rotaract club. We had a morning club that I belong to. My wife belongs to the noon club. I meet on Tuesdays. She meets on Thursdays. And then we had a young professionals club, and again, the Rotaract club. Well, you have a tendency, at least I did when I first started clubs, to think, okay, we'll meet at a country club on a Tuesday morning at 7:30. Well, obviously I asked everyone I know to join my club, and people didn't join. Some of them didn't join my club because it does meet Tuesday at 7:30 in the morning. My wife wanted to take my son when he was younger. He just turned 18, but she wouldn't want to join my club because she wanted to go to the bus stop with him in the mornings. And some people work during the days. We have some people who are teachers who got to teach during the day. So remember, it's their club. It's not our club. When we started the Network for Empowering Women as a club, I thought that name was way too long. But that's the name they wanted. So you should let them have their name because it's their club. They wanted to do their charter party on a Sunday because most of the women worked during the week who were members of the club. There were men in the club as well, and then they had children activities mostly on Saturday. So I my opinion wasn't important. Their opinion's important. So especially when it comes to meeting time, location, format, social service projects, those are all things you should get their opinion on. So step 5 shouldn't be ignored. We have an old way of doing things in Rotary, and we have a new way of doing things. When it comes to funding clubs, the old way used to be that clubs were only formed in the areas where there were big cities, new clubs, and only by the oldest club that was around. Usually those clubs, that are in the single digits. I know in my club, we have number 9, and they were the club that was forming clubs. In St. Paul, they have number 10, and they were forming clubs. But if you go to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, they might be in the Black Hills, need an environmental club because there's so much environment there to protect and study. But it usually didn't happen. Why? Because there wasn't money behind these new clubs. And it takes about $1,500 to start a new club. It's different every place, but we talked earlier about Club Runner. Some places have DAC-DB. There's different vendors who provide those services. That costs money. There's money that's needed for the bell and the gavel if you use those things in the club. Pull up banners, name tags, case for name tags. There's all these little things that you might need. Now, what you can do is you could actually, and I suggest you do this, you go to the different clubs in the district and you ask them to give an in-kind contribution. We need a bell. Club next door, can you buy that bell for $300? Steve Dakin, he just made a beautiful gavel, hand turned, that he gave to Stephanie, who's our Rotary International President nominee, because I'm sorry, Steve, I think his great grandfather was a vice president of Rotary International, and he donated the bell. And Steve just made a gavel that Stephanie is going to donate to Rotary International. Um, so you can do that with your clubs around. We did that with the district to our north, 5580, even though it was starting in our district. They gave us 2 pull-up banners, and one of them you saw in the beginning. We had people donate name tags and everything else. So why do that? Not only does it give you money and give you those things you need to start a club, but it actually gets them involved. If Lyle's club wants to donate a bell for one of the clubs he starts, and you could put your name, you could put your district's name, whoever gives money, a club name. And if they have a chartering event, like some clubs have a remembrance celebration of the charter every year on the day of their chartering. Not the year, of course. But it's when you have your charter celebration, you can invite all those people and you can recognize them. Plano, Texas Club gave us the flag that we're using, the Rotary flag that we're using. So it just gets more people involved. But also, that was the old way, get the oldest club with the most money to start a new club. Usually it was a young professional club. The new way is to have the district set aside funds so that they can start clubs. And I know several of you have done that in your districts. What we did in my district during my year as governor, we passed a pro-growth policy. Because what we realized as a district is every year we set our budget. And what did we set our budget on? The number of clubs that were paying and the number of individuals who are paying to their clubs, who paid to the district. And that's what the number we used. And then we realized when you start a new club, you're not relying in your budget on those funds anyway. So what we said is we are actually going to waive the district fees for 1 year from when you charter. Now, that might not seem like a lot of money, but when we were approaching the veterans, they said, well, you just want us like everyone just wants us for our money and our members. And so this was a way for us to, as we say in the US, have skin in the game. We were able to say, you know what, the district is going to waive its fees for the first year. And that gives you a lot of credibility for them. And they might be suspicious when you first approach them, but when they find out Rotaries for Peace, when they find out Rotaries, all the things we did with the UN, we're going to eradicate polio, they become Rotarians just like us, but you kind of have to put their need first. So that's one way to get the funds. So after you've done all that, and you have, let's say, 50 people or so, maybe it's 40, whatever you need, and you need less if it's going to be an e-club and even less if it's going to be a satellite club. But then you hold your organizational meeting. And what we did is we just held it in the basement of a Lutheran church. Now, Rotary is not religious and it's not political, but sometimes those places of worship have free facilities. A lot of cities, as part of development agreements, when buildings get built, they have meeting rooms that banks have to let open to the public. But what we usually do is we put some sort of PowerPoint together. Not that you'd have to do that, but the reason we do that is we teach the prospective Rotarians how to run a meeting. So we do the Pledge of Allegiance. Of course, if they don't want to do it, they can do away with it. We do the 4-way test, which most clubs want to keep, and that's part of our tradition. In Texas, when we started our second Veterans Club, they do a pledge to the country of Texas before they do a pledge to the country of the USA, which was new to me. But this organizational meeting, it's important because it's where you get the buy-in, you get a consensus built. Now, what we did is we brought in a professional facilitator to find out what do all these members want. And we started with what are the pillars that you want for this club? And it's interesting because I'm not in the military, which is one of the things I'll talk about later. But it was interesting to me, the first thing that they all came up with, and these were people, someone from the Army, someone from the Navy, someone from the Air Force, someone from the Coast Guard, but they all were in agreement that they wanted peace as their number one thing, which was counterintuitive to me, but that's why they joined the armed services. They want peace. So when they found out that was a big deal for Rotary, that was great. The second thing is service. They all wanted to do service. And the third was camaraderie, because a lot of veterans, they commit suicide because someone's got their back when they're in the service, but when they come back to a place they haven't been for a while, sometimes they don't have friends. So anyways, it was interesting to see so many different types of people come down to that consensus. But the other thing it allowed us to do is it allowed us to find out some of the information that you couldn't find out in those small lunch meetings, such as who's going to be your officers. And, usually you have people who volunteer for those positions. The hardest one to fill is the Rotary Foundation chair, because a lot of them don't know about the Rotary Foundation. And maybe they don't want to ask for money, but you're always able to fill it eventually. So the seventh, and I'll try to go through this quickly because it's a little bit boring. This part is following the paperwork, but it's important because people have this idea that it's really hard to start a club and that there's mounds of paperwork you have to fill out. But the reality is there's only 4 things you have to tender. I know I have 5 here because one is a club constitution. And if you want to, my first club, I drafted a constitution and Rotary kicked it back because they said you have to use the standard club constitution. So when you talk to someone in club and district support for a Rotary club, that's where you'd go. You file it different for a Rotary club and even different still for a satellite club. But when you file it with CDS for a Rotary club, John Hannes, whoever takes the application, they have a blank form in your file and it just says Constitution of blank Rotary Club, and they fill that in. So you don't have to worry about doing that. You have to fill out an application, and for a Rotary Club, it's only 4 pages, even less for a Rotary Club, and even less still for a satellite club. Bylaws are important. We can get you a form of that. Not a big deal. Now, the last page 4 of this application that you tender to club and district support will basically ask for your required 20 members, certain things that they need to know. Do you want electronic or do you want a paper copy of the Rotary magazine? What's your work address? What's your secondary work address? What's your home address? What's your second, those kind of things. Now they don't tell you this, and I'm not sure why, but there's a spreadsheet out there that we can email you and you can fill out that spreadsheet. And it's so much easier than filling out that separate page, which ends up being a page times 20. And then you could just submit that spreadsheet. Now, you really want to fill that spreadsheet out correctly, because if you leave a lot of blanks, they're going to kick it back, or they're going to start calling those numbers and things like that. But if you don't have a secondary address, just put NA in it, and that works fine. And the right time to do it is when you get somebody in and says, I want to be a charter member, type it out then. My first club, I remember a guy who worked in the office. It was painful because I was sitting there typing when we got 40 members and he was sitting there reading. So don't do it like I did it for my first one. Fill it out as it comes in, because then you have extra time to get that information. You don't want everyone fired up and ready to start the club, and then it takes a while to fill that out. So the application itself is pretty simple. 3 different applications, but it's not difficult. The most difficult part is actually trying to find the members who are going to fill those officer types. So you need a president, secretary, president-elect, treasurer, membership chair, Rotary Foundation chair. They don't have to stay in that role for a long time. If they want to just do it for a few months until you get the club started and someone else do it, that's fine. A lot of times we get asked the question, do you actually have to form a corporation in your state? So it's not a simple question to answer, because you can do it or you don't have to do it. Rotary International will not require you to form with your Office of the Secretary of State a corporation. I suggest you do this, but I suggest you do this after you've actually got approval of the name, because sometimes there's naming conventions, and when you submit it, CDS might require you to say, Illinois, USA, or something like that. So you don't want to have to do a name change for your company. Why do I suggest you do it? Because nothing is more frustrating to start a club for an individual, and then that individual, let's say she or he is the treasurer, And then all of a sudden they have to move and all the accounts are in their name. Or Alex just recently ran into a situation where all the electronic programs, their SurveyMonkey and all that, and all the other programs were in an individual's name, and that individual now wants to move to a different club. So you have a little bit of continuity if you have filed articles. But again, after you get the name is the best time to do it. Again, club constitution, don't make the mistake I did of filling one out. Just just worry about the bylaws, and the constitution is the standard. And that's according to our policy. We cannot change that even if we wanted to. You can make your bylaws do different things for whatever is important to you. If you're Steve Denkin or Dave Cook and you're going to start the 18th Satellite Club, and they're forming a new club there, maybe don't put a prohibition in there that there can't be another club. If it's not prohibited, you can do it. But maybe if they know they're going to have a satellite club, maybe put it in there. So that's where you make the different changes. Now, the membership list, this is that spreadsheet I was telling you about. It's so much easier to do that, and you can collapse the columns as you're doing it. So I suggest you do that. So Lyle brought up a great point about you have to pay a certain amount per member. Right now it's $15. There was a time during COVID that you can do it on credit card, which is great. But that requires calling finance department instead of CDS. So sometimes it's easier just to do a check. Another mistake I've made in the past is I get my 25 members, I tender the application, and then I add a member, and then I add another member. And so the number of members don't match with the check I've sent in, and that causes problems. And it takes my club that I'm trying to start from the top of the pile to the bottom of the pile. So what I would say is get the numbers, get the 20 you need or the 25. CDS likes 25, but you can do it with 20. And write that check when you get the 20 members, and then add the new members after. You could always call them charter members if you want to. Now, I always use you could be a charter member if you act quickly, but we're about to get to 20, and after 20, I'm going to file. And sometimes you get 3 or 4 applications in because they want the designation of being a charter member. And what I do is you don't have to do this, but if you want to, Russell Hampton has very fancy charter member certificates, which are kind of oriented as portrait as opposed to landscape. And I just get, inexpensive frames from Target or a local store. I have somebody calligraphy them and make them nice, put them in a frame and actually call them up and hand it out. It's a big deal for them. And you can get charter member pins too. So the first club I started, like Deb, I was tired. I didn't want to do a charter event. And my DG said, you need to do a charter event. And he couldn't have been more right. So what we did is we had a charter event. We had a little 5-piece brass band. And for the veterans, everyone always wants to contribute to the veterans because of the service they did. And we had all people give a lot of stuff. But what it did give us an opportunity to, we were able to do press releases, and if you need samples, we can get those to you, that this event was coming. So we had radio, we had TV. And we asked the charter members to bring their family members. And a lot of their family members were also in the military. So you'll find out that when you charter with 20, there's always those people out there that want to make sure it's going to be a real deal. I want to make sure that the club is really going to form. So they wait till it forms, and then you get a couple more. Now, when we had it on the local news stations and we had it in the newspapers, we actually get people call us up and say, hey, tell me about this club, I want to join. So sometimes having a charter event, and if it's not in person, it's virtual, you have the same thing. People hear about it and you get a little bump. So sometimes it seems like you're always, when you're going from 20 to 25, those last 5 are the hardest, but after you charter, you usually get more people. So you charter, and that's great, and you started, but what you got to remember is people join a club because they want to do something. And I love Lyle's comment inside our last session that talked about they use their $500 to do service projects. because people want to do service projects with like individuals who are serving for the same cause. So your new club can be a magnet that attracts these members to do something. The Veterans Club, it's not a club for veterans. It's a club to serve veterans. So not every member of the Veterans Club is a veteran. And legally, um, Rotary International is a corporate entity under the laws of Illinois, and you cannot exclude someone because they're not a particular type. It's funny because our DGND, our soon to be DGN, he is a pastor, and it's actually in his church where we meet most of our meetings. He's a member of this club. He actually left my club and joined this club because he has a son-in-law who's in the active military. We actually had the sheriff of Hennepin County, which is the big county in Minneapolis. He joined our club because many of his staff are actually veterans. So it's all about the service. So what we have to do is we have to take our clubs and we have to find service opportunities that match our club's interest. Now that is not hard. In our district, we went to the other clubs and say, hey, do you have any veterans projects? And there were 3 or 4 that had veterans memorials that were built, but they needed a group to clean them. Well, our vets were all over that project. Our Brooklyn Park Club, they get together at the holidays and they write holiday cards to active militaries. They send them out. So they would meet over beer and pizza at a pizza joint, and they would do that. Well, they made the Veterans Club in charge of that. My club, the Edina Morningside Rotary, we have a 4th of July parade. And part of that parade is the city has a dinner for 200 or so veterans. And that's actually one of the reasons that, when I started, this was one of the first clubs I started because I had that mailing list of 200 people. And that helped. So, but they also have their own projects. And what you see in the back is Havens for Heroes. It's about 30 minutes north of where we live and where this club meets. But it's a home for homeless vets. And there's 5 or 6 buildings similar to that. And their first project was they wanted to redo the first floor of this building to make it a game room. So they can shoot pool, play darts, they could play poker, that kind of thing, watch movies. And that was important to them because remember that third prong we talked about, it was camaraderie. That was important to them. So we actually helped them get a $32,000 grant within 3 weeks of the forming of the club. And so we went in, and it's always good to have hands-on projects. So that's why I'm holding a sander there, because we sanded the walls and painted the walls. We sanded the floor. And then it's also good to brand the project. We put the Rotary Club of Minnesota Veterans, we painted that on the wall. Now they're talking about doing another first floor in another building to do telecommuting for jobs. So they would have job fairs in there and people can interview for jobs there. And then a year after next, they're going to do one for healthcare where they can, talk to healthcare professionals. So it doesn't matter what it is as long as they choose it. But if it's something that's totally not in line with their cause, then they might, fuss about it and they may leave the club. And don't worry that the avenues of service, such as, children, serving children, isn't met. I always get that question, well, the vets don't do anything for children. Well, of course they do. They do Toys for Tots. They do blood drives. They do all kinds of same service projects, but they like to focus on the ones that help veterans. So that's generally the steps, the 9 steps, and you can break them up different ways, but that's how I think about starting clubs. Now, every time you start a club, you learn something. So I thought telling you about all the mistakes I've made would help you not make those mistakes when you start clubs. So I just picked the top 8 clubs where I've learned the most from. So, and these are all good clubs. But our Twin Cities Eco Club, which is a great club, thriving, doing really well. The thing I learned there is you have to jump in with both feet and you have to start your club. There's another eco club on the West Coast that didn't get started. And the first time they called me for help, I said, well, how long have you been working on this? And they said 5 years. Well, what happens is, and Kay knows all about this club because her children in this club and they were leadership in this club. It went really well when we got started. But when Steve and I first started, we would talk to one person, and that person would get interested. Maybe we talk to another person, but then it would be a couple months before we talked to our third or fourth person, and then we'd lose one of the first two people because they didn't see that it was going. So that's one thing that Steve and I learned. And we would, if you would ask him today, what's the one thing you would do in starting a club? And I always ask everyone that who's starting a club, he would say, go in both feet and work it hard and, get that momentum going. So the second thing I learned, and I learned this from the Vets Club that we've been using as the example, is all of you can start a club. If Tom Gump can start a club, you can start a club. I was not a veteran. My father was, but I wasn't a veteran, but I was able to start a vets club. So if Gump can do it, you can too. And that's the story. And when we used to start clubs, we didn't have Alex helping us. We didn't have all of you as innovative club advocates. We didn't have you as assistant Rotary coordinators. And to tell you the truth, it was kind of a battle because I remember when I first used to talk about cause-based clubs, people would say, oh, that's going to be political. You're going to have all these political activists who are starting clubs just for that. Of course that didn't happen. And of course that wouldn't happen because they're Rotarians and we have other values other than political causes. So it's easier now because you have all these people to help you and you have our regional membership officer. Temporary, but will be permanent. Now, the interesting thing we learned from the End Human Trafficking Club, and Mark talked about this. Mark is a past international president, Mark Maloney, and he's going to be the head trustee in year 24-25 for the Rotary Foundation. And he has a sister who he tried for 4 decades to get to join Rotary. And it was funny because what he told us on Monday night was his sister used to call and he'd say, I can't talk to you now, I'm busy, I have to go to a Rotary event. And now she joined this club. She joined it a few years ago, back in 2020. And the reason she didn't join it for 40 years, when Mark was asking her all the time, even when he was beginning his presidency, is because there wasn't a club that met her needs. She was teaching school U.S. history in Turkey, and she could only meet at night, and she could only meet virtually, and she only wanted to work on the cause of ending human trafficking. We have so many great causes in our 7 areas focus: water projects, basic literacy, all kinds of economic development projects, WASH projects. But she only wanted to focus in this area. And the same is true with millennials. They want to have great impact in one area, let's say the environment, like the club case started. So what we learned is it's okay to have one particular cause. And if you reach out to the community and ask them what they want, they will come back and tell you what causes they want. So what did we learn about from the Rotary Club of Network for Empowering Women? We learned one of the most important lessons we could have learned, and that is new clubs help us on the diversity level. During my district governor year, we started 8 clubs. And when we looked back, we went from 30% female to 32.25%. And I know Kay will say that's not enough, and that's absolutely true. It's not enough. We were trying to get to 35% worldwide by the end of this year. And what we want is we want gender parity, like our Rotaract clubs have. They have 52% female. But we made a little bit of progress during my year as district governor. But when we looked back, we found out that really the growth came from 3 major clubs. It came from our Eco Club, which is over 50% female. It came from our End Human Trafficking Club, which is over 60% female. And all those clubs started, that year. And our Network for Empowering Women was close to 70% female. So what we found out is these new clubs, and you'll see it if you go on a virtual meeting and you look at the screen for a traditional club and you look at one of our new clubs. The new clubs, remember, they're a magnet. Most of them are cause-based. They're a magnet, and people come in. They come with their own culture, and that culture is more diverse, especially with younger people working for a cause. They want to work in a diverse culture. So what did we learn from our E-Club for Global Travelers? This was a club that one of my best friends in my club, she was Paula Schwartz. She was, when I was president of my club, she was our international service chair. And I met her originally on a trip to Honduras when we were doing a well project. She sold her business here. She moved down to Florida to retire. She joined a club there and they only did local service. So she quit a few months into it. So we decided to start a club, and all they do is international service. They just been to Vietnam, they're going to Cuba, they do service projects all over the world. But when we started that, when you first ask a club as an ICA or an ARC, hey, you need to start a new club, they say, that's too hard. It's too difficult. I won't be able to find members. It was easy to find members because Paula reached out to global exchanges that she had been on. I reached out. Our family is big into youth exchange. That's what Catherine, Andrew, and I like to do. We talked to the host families, and we talked to some peace fellows, and we had one of them join. So you can use those networks. I mean, there's so many people that had positive, life-changing experiences through Rotary, and after they were through that experience, they didn't join a club. Well, let's reach out, let's find them, and let's start it. You could also use Rotary groups to actually help you grow a new club. We wanted to do a Rotaract club because these new clubs, as you know, could be either Rotaract clubs or Rotary clubs, and can even be satellite clubs, or as Alex likes to call them, companion clubs. We contacted Rotary Exchange, a Rotary Action Group, SRAG, the Environmental Sustainability Rotary Action Group, because action groups, they advise on funding, they advise on how to do projects, but they don't actually do projects because they can't apply for grants because they're not a club. So we called SRAG and said, can you give us a list of people under 30? Because we want to do an international club that focuses on the environment for young people. They gave us a list of 120 people. Within a few months, we started this club, and this club is just doing great. Why? Because they liked being an advisor to other clubs, but these young people wanted to get their hands dirty, just like in that picture, and they wanted to do the projects. So this club allowed them to do it. So we got help. You could do the same thing. You could also go out and reach out to other nonprofits and help them out. We started a Rotaract club called Kaleidoscope to serve people with autism and their families. We partnered up with MICC, which is a group that provides housing and jobs for people with autism everywhere on the scale, even adults. And, we learned a lot from this club. Actually, the first president was autistic, and he wanted to be president. And we were thinking that it would be a grandparent or parent of a young person. So leverage those groups, And you need to not get discouraged when you come up with a problem. When we were starting the Pride Club, there was Minnesota Pride was the name they wanted. And it turns out that there's a women's football team here in Minnesota called Minnesota Pride. And so, when they did the legal research, which goes to risk analysis inside of Rotary International nowadays, they said, you can't use that name. So what we did is we approached the football team, and the owner of the team was a woman. And we asked her if we could do a memorandum of understanding to allow us to use the name. They let us. And now she's a member of the club. She's one of those people pictured in that little logo that they have. So we're going to wrap this up because we want to get to questions, and we'll have 15 minutes for that, which was our plan. Alex wanted you to know what all these clubs have in common, the successful clubs, and most of them are successful. Yes, it takes some nurturing. Yes, some new clubs, just like old clubs, fail, but most of them are successful. But the ones that are really successful have a passionate champion, someone who really wants to do that club. And I'm sure Lyle had that when he started his club for the lake and the environment. Camaraderie and friendship. People want to serve with like-minded people. They want to do it together. That's why they join a club. They do want to serve. They don't want to, do it on their own. And even if you're an E-club, our End Human Trafficking Club is an E-club. But what they do is they pick a week where they all do service projects in their area. So they might be gathering items for a domestic violence shelter, and then they come back and talk about it. But if you don't have that service, people leave. They started with family or friends. Your first few members will be people that you know, and usually in the area that you know. And most of them, you don't need a club sponsor, but most of the successful clubs were started by a club or a district. And more often, like we talked about before, it's going to be a district. So where do we see clubs forming? The easiest club to form would be it would be basically a passport club where you mine DACDB or Club Runner and get people who recently left within the last 5 years, and you call them and say, "Hey, Alex, why did you leave?" And Alex would say, whatever his reason is. Maybe Steve didn't want to go to a meeting during the day because he was going out and building Suco homes during the day. But other opportunities, veterans, because they really are service projects. And now that we've started some of these clubs like veterans and end human trafficking, you have all kinds of good examples you can show. And wherever there's a need, you can do it. Environmental clubs, there's a dozen of those around the world. Literacy clubs. Literacy is the number one, when we do surveys in Rotary International, the number one cause that people are interested in. Now it represents only a small number of our grants, but that's our grant process and the sustainability part that you have to prove. WASH projects, 2 clubs in Australia are starting homelessness clubs, and really anywhere you see a need. So this is the year, within 20 more days, we're imagining Rotary. So what I'd like to do is, as ARCs and ICAs, I'd like you to imagine the districts that you're responsible for, how much they would grow if you had one cause-based club for every area of focus. Maybe you have one club that's for alumni, where you reach out to the people who have been Youth Exchange or Rotex, or people who have been Peace Fellows, and you start one club, because that's an easy sell. That's not only low-hanging fruit, that's food on the ground. They know about Rotary. Their life was changed in a positive way about Rotary. Bring them in. And then go out there and think about people you can reach, those potential people of action you see, you know, around your home, if it's around your family, where you worship, where you work, where you work out. Reach out to them and ask them, what kind of Rotary Club do you want? If you can meet anytime, if you can meet anywhere, if you can meet electronically, if you could have socials the way you want them. I know Alex is, for good cause, pushing these companion clubs, where in zones 33 and 34, they call them impact clubs, where they're satellite clubs, or as we call them here, companion clubs, where they only do service, they only meet twice a month, and they have a few people do the administrative stuff, not at a meeting. Think about those things and then go ahead and do them. So what I'd like to do now is my favorite part, and that's ask you to give me any questions that you have, because I'd like to answer them. And if I can't, I'm sure as a group we can, because there's a lot of smart people who I learn from on the screen.
Number one, since you
Barbara's got her
created
hand up.
this for all of us, would you be willing to share some of the information and slides?
All of
And-
it. I've sent
All
it to Alex already.
Alex. All right. And number two, as you know, and Alex as well, I have been compassionate about the work that I do, and the cause-based club that I'm working to conclude, have not been able to finish it like Deb, is the focus of Alzheimer's disease. Everyone knows someone, everyone has someone that is in their neighborhood that has been impacted and affected, and it has been a great opportunity for me to connect people to our family of Rotary.
I think that is such a great cause. So many of us have family members and friends that have had that. And I know my wife's club, every year they have a person who's the head of 4 states for the Alzheimer's Association. She's actually hired some people from my wife's club to work for her, but they have a walk every year. So her club and my club, we do that. So I can see, lots of support, and maybe they could give you some ideas of where to get members from.
Absolutely. We have in our Rotary district, that was one of my initiatives, and we raised the most money from all of our walks in the clubs that had them in our communities. So thank you. Thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Yeah, I can see, we do our walk around the Twin Stadium where we play baseball, our professional team plays baseball. I can see a table there with balloons, the Alzheimer's Association's got purple balloons. And Demetrius handing those out with Rotary caps, and, maybe when we're doing the walk. I just think that is a great idea.
Next we have Barbara and then Sridhar. Barbara, you're muted.
Yeah, okay. So this is not creative at all. Tom, could you go back to um, um, the legal status, the incorporation? And it seems to me that it's such a great advantage to be a nonprofit club. I mean, that's been very difficult this year, raising funds for Ukraine and so forth, and not being a nonprofit Rotary Club. So that's what I was trying to look at the print on what the certificate you held up. That's what you're talking about, right?
So, the state, there is your state government, and you can file as a nonprofit club in your state. And it's usually a different chapter of whatever state you're in. But to be a 501c3, which is an IRC, Internal Revenue Code designation that you have to get from the federal government, is a different step. A Rotary Club, and there's some clubs around the world that have filled out applications and have been provisionally accepted as a nonprofit with a 501c3 designation. But technically, if you are a membership organization, you provide value to your members, such as food and those kind of things, get-togethers, all the things that clubs do. You can't classify as that. So, like in our Veterans Club that I was telling you about, the World War II gentleman, he gave us $5,000 to start a foundation. So you could have a separate legal entity as the foundation, and they can file for charitable recognition that way. A lot of districts also have a district foundation that will keep your nonprofit funds separate from your operating funds, and you can do it that way. And I would suggest doing it that way, because if you're ever challenged by the IRS, your club is probably, needs to be an operating entity that's not a nonprofit, and your foundation needs to be a nonprofit. But when you start these clubs, Barb, it's great, because last week the Veterans Club got a call from Safety Auto Glass and wanted to give them to their foundation $20,000, so they could run a golf tournament and made even more money. They did not seek it. They called just because it's a Veterans Club. So, and it's great. When you start one of these clubs, and I'm sure all of you who have started them, and there's many I see on the screen who have, you have made your mark in Rotary. I mean, in the Veterans Club, they call me dad when I go there. And I used to hate it when they do it, but now I'm just okay with it, because, they appreciate you helping them serve. So you're just going to love when these clubs start forming.
On the Sridhar, Steve, and then Lyle.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question again is somewhat procedural. A new club, be it a regular club or a companion service club, it has to be sponsored by another club, or the district can also be a sponsor?
You can actually, a club can be a sponsor, a district can be a sponsor, a Rotaract club can be a sponsor, or they can sponsor themselves. We like it if a district or club sponsors it, or a Rotaract club. And it's interesting because some of the new clubs actually form clubs faster than our existing clubs. And there's been several examples of that. And sometimes you'll see the new clubs grow faster than other clubs. Alex goes to a meeting once a month with the other Rotary coordinators in North America, and, different areas think differently. But, a lot of people are negative on new clubs because they heard of a club that started and then that it failed. So far, the ones that I've been involved with, they have not failed. So I'm not saying that they won't, but there's a lot of examples of clubs that just do well once they start. And it's different because these cause-based clubs, most of our people leave within the first 3 years, but these causes of these new clubs, like Lyle started his around that lake and the environment, they stay long enough where they become Rotarians. The reason people leave quickly is because they don't understand Rotary, and they don't have those lifelong friendships that we have from our clubs.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Steve and Lyle next.
Well, first I want to make a comment that do not put specific meeting times in your bylaws and stuff, because there's so much changes going on. They'll just complicate your life if you do that. So keep that pretty generic. And of course, I'm in a club extensions, as you all know by now. And we have a Rotary Club in Marshalltown started a club extension with a focus on mental health. And the district has engaged into that and is supporting it. So you can't believe what can happen once you get going. And most of the time, I'm seeing more women joining it. The club extension time, because usually it's after hours in the evenings. I'm seeing more women join that. And so it's a great way to include the women in the event. And when you have a club extension, you make sure that they're both part of each other and they're on the same page together. It's really important. I sent the best practices to Alex, and he's going to send you them at the end of the year, end of the third session. You want to get everybody on the same page, and you can go to Boone's events. You can't tell who's a member of the Noon, who's a member of the club extension. You can't tell. That's what I love about club extension. Boone cannot support two clubs, but they can have two meeting times, and it works. So that's my comments on that. So, thank you.
And I have to applaud Steve, because I remember a few years ago when Lyle and Steve and I were district governors, he was working on this. And, you know, it took a lot of effort for him to talk to the clubs. A lot of people say it won't work, it won't work. Then he got Dave Cook on board, and now they've started 17 of them, and it's been a huge success. And the reason I bring that up is because you can't lose faith when you're in the middle of starting these clubs. You just got to do it and get it done, because there are success stories out there and they do work. So Lyle, take it easy on me on your question, because I know sometimes you have hard questions. Sorry. Oh, you're muted.
First, I was going to tell Steve that it's time to touch it up. It's not purple enough right now. But, the only thing that I was going to say is when you get back to the legal 501c3, 501c4, 501c6, let's remember that Rotary has a blanket 501c4 membership that new clubs can tie into, which makes a whole lot easier. And I hear some clubs tell me that they're C6s, and I don't understand why or how. It's much easier to just set up as a 4 under Rotary's blanket.
That is such good observation. I'm glad you brought that up. That is so true. And we had a gentleman here who's attorney in LLM and tax, and he did all the research, because we had a club who the president wanted to turn it from a C4 into a C3, and half the club left because they disagreed with it. So you're right, Lyle.
Yeah, we as a group, we're going to be encouraging C4s, because that's what Rotary is, and we're part of their, like Lyle said, it gets reported through the agencies all under Rotary's Master C4, and it makes it really complicated. If not, it shouldn't be done in any other entity.
And you could easily set up a foundation as a C3. That's a different
Separately, right?
If you don't have an interlocking board of directors.
That's what we're doing in Iowa. It's simpler than the C4. So in Iowa, C3s because of what Tom just said.
We've got 2 minutes left. So
Well,
we'll kind of
Stephanie,
let
do you have
Tom
any-
wrap it up.
Yep, I was wondering if Stephanie had any insights as being the head ICA for.
You know, I technically haven't started, so my insight I'm collecting from you all. Yeah, I think this is great. I am excited about the companion club concept, just as we've talked about it. I think it's a great solution to bringing in new members, and the reason why most of us joined. So I was excited to learn from you. So thank you, Tom.
So in wrap up, I gotta emphasize the point. There's a lot of people to help you. It can get done. I know you're all doing it. And I'm looking around the screen, and I've known that all of you have done it in your areas. And I'm more excited about membership growth in our zone pair than I ever have been. And I think this is the best team we've ever had. So thank you.